In the winter of 1871, when the coal smoke clung so thick to the roofs of Blackwood that the sun seemed forever drowned, a child was brought into the parish school. Her name was Catherine Doyle, 10 years old, pale as the chalk used on the slate boards, with hair the colour of ash left too long in the hearth. She came from the edge of the town, from a house that leaned against the moors as though it had been pushed there by the wind. Her mother never spoke in church, and her father had been dead for years, or so the neighbours whispered, though none recalled a funeral. On the first morning, Catherine sat silent among the other children, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not fidget, did not blink often, did not join the laughter or cruelty of the others. Instead, she listened. Her eyes followed each child as though she were collecting their faces, their movements, their very breathing into herself. The schoolmistress, a stern widow named Mrs. Hargreaves, remarked later that the girl's silence was not the silence of shyness, but of attention too intent, too knowing. By the third day, the first unease began. During arithmetic, when little Thomas Brannigan dropped his slate and cut his hand on its edge, Catherine turned to him and said softly, "She was born speaking strange things. I told no one because no one should know." Thus Catherine entered the life of Blackwood, a child among children, yet not of them. The first secret had already escaped her lips, and the town, though it did not yet know it, had begun to rot beneath the weight of what she carried. The first week passed with Catherine walking the narrow streets of Blackwood under the eyes of neighbours who could not decide whether to pity her or fear her. Some said she was merely odd, a lonely child repeating gossip she had overheard. Others, especially the older women who remembered tales of witches hanged in darker centuries, muttered that she was marked. But it was on a bitter Sunday evening in the candlelit hush of St. Michael's Church that Catherine spoke the first secret no child should ever know. The townsfolk had gathered for evensong. The pews creaked with heavy bodies in black wool, and the air smelled of tallow smoke and damp earth. Catherine sat with her mother at the very back, her small face washed pale by the flickering light. When the hymn ended and Father Armitage lifted his voice to pray, Catherine stood suddenly, her thin frame rising in silence that made every head turn. Her voice was soft, almost tender, yet carried through the nave as if the stone walls themselves The laundress swore she had seen a barefoot girl slip from the vestry one late night, her hair unbound, her eyes red with tears. Another villager claimed he had heard muffled cries beneath the church floor. The priest thundered from the pulpit the next week, declaring Catherine Doyle an instrument of the devil, but the congregation no longer met his eyes. When he walked the street, shutters closed, mothers crossed themselves. A shadow lay over him heavier than any sermon could dispel. And Catherine? She remained silent, except for one chilling remark to her mother as they walked home beneath the frozen gaslights. Secrets don't stay buried. They knock from under the floor until someone listens. The town of Blackwood began to fracture, trust dissolving into suspicion. Catherine had spoken her first true secret, and the silence that followed was far louder than her words. After the night in St. Michael's, Blackwood ceased to be the same town. The people still rose before dawn to stoke their fires and trudged to the mills with their lunch pails. But behind every routine movement lurked a glance, a whisper, a tightening of lips. Catherine Doyle's words had spread like smoke, impossible to catch, impossible to ignore. The children of the parish school began to avoid her completely. At recess, they scattered like frightened birds whenever she stepped into the yard. Even Thomas Brannigan, who had once been the on its own unease. Each morning the mill wheels turned, smoke poured over the rooftops, and children dragged their slates to school, yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of life lay an unspoken question. When would Catherine speak again? Father Armitage, shamed and avoided since her words in church, resolved to reclaim his authority. He visited the Doyle cottage one bitter evening, the wind clawing at his cassock. He carried with him a small crucifix, a vial of holy water, and a voice sharpened by fear. "Your daughter," he declared to Catherine's weary mother, "is an open door through which the devil walks. I will cleanse her before she drags this town into ruin." Catherine sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Without lifting her eyes, she whispered, "It was not the devil who locked the vestry door, Father. It was you." The priest went pale, his hand trembling so violently that the vial nearly fell. He muttered a prayer, but the words stuttered, breaking into fragments. Finally, he turned and fled, leaving the door swinging wide behind him. By morning he was gone from Blackwood, said to have taken a train east, though no one knew exactly where. His absence did not silence Catherine's name. It amplified it. With the priest gone, the townsfolk sought another kind of authority: the doctor. Dr. Nathaniel Gray was a man of science, trained in London and armed with the new language of nervous disorders and delusions. He visited the Doyle home with a leather bag of instruments and a calm, clinical demeanor. He examined Catherine's eyes, her pulse, her tongue, and declared to her mother, "She is afflicted with hysteria, nothing more. Children of her age are prone to mimicry, suggestion, and fancy. It is the fever of imagination, not the voice of heaven or hell." But Catherine spoke while he took her pulse, her voice as sown, steady as a church bell. "You write letters to a woman not your wife. They are hidden beneath the false bottom of your medical chest. If your wife finds them, doctor, she will know the child you fathered in Manchester still breathes." Dr. Gray's hand snapped back as though burned. For a moment, his mask of reason cracked. The pulse stopped beneath his fingers, not because her heart had faltered, but because his own had. He packed his instruments quickly, muttering something about nerves and fancies, and left without looking Catherine in the eye. By the following week, he too had departed town. His wife was seen boarding a carriage, her face streaked with tears. Blackwood now stood stripped of its guides. Priest and doctor alike had been undone by the child's tongue. Religion had failed, science had failed, and the townsfolk were left with nothing but the terrible knowledge that no secret, no matter how carefully hidden, was safe. And Catherine, pale and silent, sat by the fire each evening as though waiting for the next truth to press itself against her lips. The cold weeks of March settled over Blackwood like a shroud. Snow melted into black slush along the cobbles, the mill's smoke turned the skies a permanent dusk, and still the town kept its distance from the Doyle girl. She had spoken little since the priest and doctor fled, yet her silence was more terrible than her words. People began to walk faster, whisper softer, keep shutters closed tighter, for no one knew when her tongue might open again. It happened on a Wednesday evening in the marketplace, when the stalls were closing and the lamps flickered against the fog. Catherine stood near the fountain, her hands folded in her grey shawl. Around her, mothers tugged their children away, but one man lingered, Alderman Samuel Price, the wealthiest figure in Blackwood. He was broad of shoulder, proud of beard, and known for building the school itself. He had always dismissed the child's tales as nonsense, muttering that idle tongues rot faster than teeth. But when he passed her that evening, Catherine lifted her pale eyes to him and spoke in a voice so calm it seemed rehearsed. "The fire in your mill was no accident, Alderman. 23 men lost their lives, and you told their widows it was God's will. But you know the lock on the north door was fastened from outside. You know why you paid the watchman to vanish." The marketplace froze. The air itself seemed to thicken. Price's ruddy face drained to clay, his lips opening but no words escaping. Around him the widows of those dead men, women who had wept at his handshakes, clung to his charity, began to tremble. One dropped her basket, onions rolled across the stones. Another screamed and spat at his boots. "You lie!" he thundered, but his voice cracked like a rotten beam. He raised his cane as if to strike the child, but she did not flinch. She only added, still soft, still calm, "The watchman's bones lie neath your summer house, where the earth is always damp." Gasps tore through the crowd. Mothers pulled their children close. Men stepped back as though a plague had entered the square. Price stumbled, stammering, his authority crumbling before the silent witness of the people. He shoved through them, fled toward his carriage, and vanished into the fog. That night, a group of men, half drunk with rage and dread, dug into the ground near the alderman's summer house. By lantern light, they unearthed what Catherine had foretold: a shallow grave, a body collapsed in soil still damp with seeping water. The constable refused to comment. The magistrate turned pale and silent, and by morning, Alderman Price was gone. His fine house emptied, his carriage tracks leading out of town. Blackwood convulsed. Secrets were no longer private sins. They were crimes clawed into daylight. Every man wondered what the girl knew of him. Every woman wondered what truth she might speak of her husband or child. And Catherine? She did not boast, nor tremble, nor smile. She walked home in the fog, her small figure vanishing into the dark, leaving behind a marketplace that would never again be a place of barter, but a place of fear. By April, Blackwood had become a place of whispers. Shutters closed earlier, candles burned lower, and the very air seemed tense, as if waiting for Catherine Doyle's next breath to summon ruin. Fathers walked stiff-backed, terrified that their children might glance at the Doyle girl and hear her voice in their dreams. Mothers hushed their infants with prayers rather than lullabies. But Catherine herself grew quieter. She attended school no more. Her mother kept her cloistered in the leaning cottage by the moors, as if bricks and mortar could muffle what lived in the child's chest. Yet even in her silence, the people swore they heard her. Men claimed her voice followed them into alehouses, naming debts they thought forgotten. Women swore she spoke in their kitchens, though no door had opened, whispering of betrayals hidden in letters or looks. Whether true or madness, no one could say, but fear became flesh in Blackwood. And then came the night. It was the eve of Easter, the year's holiest vigil. The townsfolk gathered in St. Michael's despite their dread, clinging to ritual as if to a rope above a pit. The church was cold, the stone walls dripping with candlelight, the altar bare but for the brass cross. The new curate, a trembling young man from Leeds, led the prayers with a voice that cracked like a boy's. Midway through the hymn, the doors groaned wide. Catherine entered. Her mother followed, pale as linen, but she did not restrain the child. Catherine walked the aisle alone, her small shoes tapping against the flagstones, her face blank as winter sky. None stopped her. The congregation parted in silence, every throat dry, every heart pounding like a drum. She reached the altar and turned. Her voice, when it came, was neither loud nor shrill, but so steady that it carried to every corner of the nave. There is a secret none of you speak, a truth buried deeper than the mill fires, deeper than the vestry doors. It is the town itself. Blackwood was built on bones. You pray over graves you do not see. Gasps rippled. Someone sobbed. Catherine raised one small hand, pointing to the very stones beneath their feet. Beneath this church lie the bodies of children, the poor, the starved, the unwanted. The town fathers sold their silence for coin, and the ground swallowed what their hands could not carry. You kneel on skulls. You sing above the cries of the buried. The curate dropped his hymnal. Women clutched their mouths. A man bellowed for her to stop, but his voice broke into a plea. Catherine's words echoed off the vaulted stone like a tolling bell. You call me cursed, but I am only your echo. It is your own secrets that rot you. Then silence fell, so absolute that the dripping wax could be heard pattering on the floor. Catherine lowered her hand, turned, and walked back down the aisle. No one dared reach for her. No one dared move. When she and her mother stepped into the night fog, the doors swung shut with a thunderclap that shook the glass in the windows. It was the last time anyone in Blackwood saw Catherine Doyle alive. By dawn on Easter morning, word had spilled through every crooked lane and soot-stained chimney of Blackwood. Catherine Doyle was gone. Her mother's cottage stood silent, the door ajar, the hearth cold. Neighbors who crept inside found no trace of child or woman, only a shawl folded neatly upon the chair where Catherine had once sat, listening to the world as if it whispered only for her. The town searched. Men with lanterns scoured the moors, their boots sinking in peat and fog. Women lit candles in windows, praying for a return that none expected. Some swore they saw a pale figure walking the ridges at dusk, her small frame blurred in the mist. Others claimed they heard her voice in the wells and drains, whispering secrets that made them recoil in horror. But no body was ever found. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood unraveled. Families moved away, claiming the mills cursed. The marketplace grew empty, its stones haunted by the memory of the aldermen's shame. St. Michael's itself was abandoned. Worshippers refused to kneel upon the floor where Catherine had pointed. The curate returned to Leeds, leaving the church locked, its bell rusting silent. and still, the whispers clung. Those who remained in Blackwood told of dreams in which Catherine stood at the foot of their beds, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of a dying fire. She never moved her lips, yet they woke knowing what she had told them, the debts they owed, the lies they carried, the sins they thought sealed in earth. A miller's wife drowned herself in the river after one inescapable, eternal,